Good morning and welcome to our Friday Freelance Fast Track webinar. That was a lot of F's. My name is Spencer Foreman. I go by Spence, the evil genius, and welcome to my lair. Today we're going to be talking about a great topic, something that is not only relevant, but something that is timeless. It's if you have multiple WordPress sites in one account, you're making a huge mistake. And today you're going to find out why and also find out what you can do about it. Now, the reason that this is so relevant is that everything that we teach, everything that I personally teach, is premised on the idea that WordPress is like a gigantic Lego set for freelance web designers. And as such, it's a really important thing that you get your base piece. You know, if you've seen Legos, that green piece that you can build on top of, if you don't get that right from the get-go, you're going to have problems going forward. And the reason is simply this. All of the things that are great about WordPress are usually based upon the idea that you can move people around to the various URLs and the various permalinks without having to have something hard-coded. WordPress takes care of it dynamically. But if your foundation, if your base isn't set up right, you're not going to be able to take advantage of that. And moreover, a lot of the things that are wonderful, like our quick launch system, are not going to work properly either. So let's get started first of all with the test. You guys should all be seeing me, I hope, inside of a new webinar page setup that has a chat to the right. You can log in and it's kind of neat. I'm going to look at it, but the video should be on the left, the chat on the right. If you expand your page, you'll be able to kind of stagger them. Today, hopefully you can hear me. Can you guys hear me? See me? Hear me, see me. All right, so I have a series of slides today. Those of you who are joining us who've never been with me before, I'm from 1WD and I specialize in teaching you how to make your freelance livelihood using WordPress, regardless of whether you're a beginner or intermediate or an advanced person. It doesn't make a difference because our training and everything that I offer starts from the basics and works to the more complex. But again, like a Lego block system, it's universal and it's evergreen. So if you come in the middle, that's okay. The business techniques, the other entrepreneurial focus, all of those things are going to apply to you throughout your career. And if you're just a beginner, don't worry, because you don't need to be a developer and you don't have to have strong CSS skills or PHP skills, or in today's example, server handling skills in order to succeed. Because all of the things that I teach are modular and you can take that lesson and build something from it. So what we're going to do today is start out with our main topic, and let's go to the slides because I have a lot to cover today and I want to make sure that you get value, because especially we're building an 8-part course out of all of the things that I'm teaching. And what's nice about that is that they're going to tie together with the larger training that I give at 1WD. You'll notice below the video I've got a link. I'm extending an offer we did over Black Friday that really worked well. If you like what you learned today, or you've just been curious about getting your freelance career started, you can click that green link at the bottom, and that's going to send you off to a $7 deal where you get our full $97 3-day boot camp course, the one that'll let you see in 3 days whether or not you can literally take our challenge up and earn $300 or more from the techniques that we teach. And this is launched, going on now 7,600 folks have gone through this before. Typically, it's been offered as part of a standalone course that you download for $97, making this a great deal, or as part of your 1WD membership for $47, where you get the content online along with literally about 170 other lessons as part of 7 and 8 primary courses. So today, that is the offer. Now, some of you guys are asking in the chat, are we going to do the tweet? We're doing an experiment today. I'm going to do a drawing. It's going to be a random drawing instead of a tweet drawing, because I want you guys to really focus and I want you to make sure you take notes, because today is going to be some technical details and I don't want you to miss a lick. So all of those who have registered today will be eligible for a random drawing for a $97 bling at 1WD. Okay, so if you're ready to pay attention, let's rock this and get into it as quickly as possible. So the topic, as I mentioned today, is if you have multiple WordPress sites in one account, you're making a huge mistake. And I want you to understand why. And that's basically what we're talking about here, is starting out with a solid foundation of not putting multiple WordPress sites into one account. And the first thing that I think is important for us to discuss is what exactly are we going to cover, and then let's break it down into maybe 5 steps. So we're going to talk today, and you're going to learn why having one WordPress installation per account is critical. Now, I want to make sure you understand what I'm saying when I say one WordPress install per account means that you have one root level installation of WordPress inside of one cPanel account. And if you're not using cPanel, you should already know this stuff probably, but you have one root level account and it has WordPress in the root, okay? And there's 5 things that are gonna come from that: security, backup, your permalinks, I can do it like this: security, backup, your permalink structure, your upsell opportunities, and most of all, your sanity. Because in order to really succeed as a freelancer and do the entrepreneurial level things that I teach you at 1WDTV and that have proven to be successful for almost all of those who've applied them, literally going from 0 to hundreds a weekend, thousands or more a month, really building a livelihood, is by optimizing your processes, by removing all of the roadblocks that otherwise keep you down. I can't tell you how often people contact me, some of them become students, who've said, you know, I've blown the last 3 days or a week or a month with this problem from a client that had a site that was from before me. And so that means that ultimately they've taken on a death march from someone else's problems and setting it up. And I want you to not only avoid taking those types of jobs without preparing for it, but I want you to know how to avoid setting up the same kind of problems and perpetuating them. Question comes in, are we also talking about for client sites or our own? And this is global. This means for all WordPress installs, both your own as well as for client. Because one of the things that I do teach, and it's inside of our Earn 3K this weekend for web hosting, is how to build a business where you can launch as many demo sites as you need to get prospects to say yes. And so you'll oftentimes, like I do, have your own reseller server. And in that case, you want to make sure you set that up properly as well, right? It's really not that difficult, but at the same time, it's something that can really send you off the deep end if you don't do it right. Okay, so let's first of all define for ourselves what we're talking about with a root. And what I'm going to do for that is I'm going to open up a window here. I'm going to actually show you my reseller server. And that doesn't mean that you need a reseller server, but it means that this is one of the ways that I've been able to get things set up very efficiently. Now, I actually have informed many of you who follow me that there are a bunch of new updates. In fact, just as of yesterday, we moved to a much faster reseller server, which is really one of the wonderful things about being in this business. The hardware, the software, the technology keeps getting better. And if you're with a host that you trust, it could be Bluehost, it could be MDD hosting like we use in this case, they'll keep updating and improving stuff. So we got the notice that the reseller server was going to be updated, and it made our life that much easier. So let's jump over to another screen, and I'm going to talk about the basic ideas of one site, because that's the premise here, one account. So let me share this screen. I have to, unfortunately, with Google, kind of bounce between windows, but that's okay. So this is a look inside of a reseller server. And the difference between a reseller server and a regular single site account is basically like the difference between a school bus and an automobile. Now, the main difference is that you can have multiple sites inside of one reseller account that you control from a single control panel. And they happen to use the name WHM, Web Host Manager, with 95% of the companies that you'll go with. I'm with, in this particular example, with MDD Hosting, and they use WHM. And WHM gives you control from the top level down. Now, this is important when you're setting up a reseller account, because it means that you can not only create different packages and create different when you start a new site for a client, you can adjust what they have available to them. But it also gives you the ability to literally pick a site and manage it from here, right? So if I typed in Lab Playground or Lab Play, I can find that account, which I often show you. Now you'll notice there's a link here for cPanel. cPanel is the actual control panel that's available inside of each individual site. Now, an important concept comes up here, and then we're going to go into the individual 5 things: security, backup, permalinks. When you are doing this as a reseller, it doesn't mean you can't use the reseller account for your own purposes. Just think of it like, if I'm going to have multiple things that I want to launch, for example, I need a demo site of this and a demo site of that, and I need a billing site for this, and I need an email server over here, it's far, far easier for you to buy and much more economical for you to acquire one reseller server and use it for both yourself as well as for your own clients than it would be to keep getting individual client sites or accounts. The only exception to that would be like what I showed on Wednesday, which was lesson 1 of this 8-part course, where I mentioned there's a company called WP Engine, which has optimized and managed WordPress hosting at a slight premium, but they have the ability inside of their control panel for you to launch multiple sites and yet still manage them from one place. So in a weird way, you can think of WHM as sort of the generic, any server can do it kind of major control panel, and then WP Engine has their own proprietary version of that. But they both accomplish the same thing. Now, when I go into cPanel, this is something that you're all familiar with in 90%, 95% of the cases. Almost any modern hosting company using Linux, Apache, MySQL, and PHP, that's called LAMP, L-A-M-P, will provide you with a cPanel or some flavor of a cPanel. So when I talk to you and say in this tutorial, I do not under any circumstances want you guys to consider having multiple WordPress sites in one account, I'm referring to an account being one account on cPanel. I'm referring to an account of being one account inside of your reseller, WHM. I'm referring to one account meaning one domain, one login, one URL. If you want to talk in terms of FTP, I'm talking about if, let's say, we were over here in this account and I open up the file manager to show you. I'm talking about, I want it to be that when you go into your public HTML, the thing that is exposed to the public, there are not multiple folders in here representing multiple WordPress sites. Now, hopefully you guys are all clear with this. I'm just going to check. I want to check over here at our window, the chat window. See, are you guys hopefully clear on this? I hope there's a little conversation going on, because basically this is the #1 mistake that people make. They think, you know what, I just got myself a hosting account and it's, you know, looks like a car, smells like a car, it's the size of a car, it has one name, but boy, if I just keep throwing stuff in there, maybe I can pretend that it's a school bus. Maybe I can just keep throwing stuff into this, you know, into this public HTML directory, because WordPress will let you do that. Maybe I'll put a folder for site 1 and site 2 and site 3 and site 4 and site 5 and site 6. Awesome. And I'm with this company that doesn't seem to stop me from doing it. So I should just keep doing that because that's awesome. And that's where the problem comes. Because just like if you tried to shove 50 school kids into your, you know, your 4-seat hatchback, when you take a single client site and instead of putting WordPress in the root, you put in a lot of directory, subdirectory folders and put WordPress into each one of those. Unless you specifically know what you're doing, you're going to have 5 things that are going to really affect your outcome, and not in a good way. But if you, on the other hand, stick with one WordPress install inside of the root of each site, those 5 items not only don't provide you any difficulty, but they actually help you to leverage your ability to make more money as a freelance web designer, which is really ultimately my goal. Okay, so let's get to this. First of all, I promised that I would start you with the real basics here. And let's go, for example, and talk about if you have the opportunity and want to go for it to get yourself a reseller server. One of the things that you can set up is called a wildcard subdomain system. And it works like this. If you'll notice, I have a domain that I use for all my business called Lab Client. Notice what happens here. I go to labclient.com and there's nothing here. Okay, if you can hopefully see at the top of the screen, there's nothing here. It's a blank page. I want that on purpose. And in fact, I click on the link and that'll take you to basically what we call a WHMCS. This is an add-on piece of software that my reseller account allows me to use that lets me manage things like billing or selling stuff. And I also use it for direct support for any of my hosted clients. But you'll notice that I don't actually have anything going on at labclient.com. But watch what happens. What if I put in something like this, https lab 2047.labclient.com. What do you think is going to happen here? Nothing. That was a good example. Let me try another one. Let's pick a client, lab 2072.labclient.com. What do you think is going to happen? Well, let's see. Hey, check that out. Look what happened. It actually went to one of the single accounts that's hosted on the reseller. And even cooler is when you click here and you navigate around, you notice that the structure and everything else remains the same, right? I can navigate it using that lab client subdomain fairly well. But watch what happens here. If I go to liftmytoes.com, that actually works too. Now, what did I just do, right? Am I being too mysterious? I want to sort of do a Socratic thing here. What I just showed you is that when you have a reseller account, whether it be for yourself or for your clients, let's get to that site. Let's go to Lab 2072. I was able to set that up almost instantaneously in order to give myself a space to launch a new client site. I didn't have to wait for the domain labclient.com to propagate. And the reason is that labclient.com was long ago set up at my domain host, who happens to be GoDaddy. And when I set it up at GoDaddy, I registered the domain and I pointed the domain for labclient over to the reseller server, which is over here. So effectively what I did is, and this is the part, metaphorically, I hope you can understand. When somebody buys a domain name and they want to use it, that has to be published to the entire world, right? That's how the domain name service or domain name system works. It's like a series of yellow page directories around the globe where a few really trusted servers hold information that connect names to IP addresses. So kind of like phone numbers to people. If I'm Spencer Foreman and I have a phone number, if you remember back in the days of the yellow pages, somebody would have to call 411 or look in the physical book to see, I'm looking up Spencer Foreman, where is he located? And it would give, ultimately, I hope, a phone number. Here, if somebody types in a domain name, they're effectively searching the domain name server directory, this virtual directory around the world of various top-level domain hosts. And what happens is they keep records that say, we have a liftmytoes.com here, and it happens to be connected to a certain IP address. And by the way, I noticed that at GoDaddy, we actually are where that name was registered, but we aren't holding the records right now. We moved them over, or we pointed them to this web host. So the web host actually has the records of, well, how do I connect that liftmytoes.com to the final WordPress site? And the way it does it is really just about the same way that GoDaddy does, is that they have what they call zone file records. So when you actually get a reseller server, you will be able to say, what is the domain that I want to use on this reseller server for any of the new sites that I create? And in my case, I chose the domain, you guessed it, labclient.com. And then the next step was I set up this thing called a wildcard. And I have a full tutorial on how to do this that's part of the Earn 3K course So you can get it at 1WDTV, or you can go, for example, even to cPanel's forums right here, and you could just search for, or I'll just give you this link of how to add a wildcard entry in the DNS zone. And it's really simple. You're literally just putting in something that looks like this. You're putting in something that says star, or if you prefer asterisk, .yourname.com. And what that effectively says is that when you go into your web host manager and you edit the DNS zone, you put in a wildcard that says, hey, anything that comes in here, let's see. We'll go back to the top. I don't want to accidentally delete this during the webinar. When I have anything that comes in here that is directed to labclient.com, I'm probably the right server. I know that this is my stuff. So let me have it, and then I will be able to point it to whatever of individual accounts I have that match. Okay. Now, each of the individual accounts can be registered by you or by your client through the cPanel. So as to say, hey, yes, I'm Lab 2072, that's me, but by the way, I'm using this domain name called Lift My Toes, so that would also apply to me. And let me show you what that looks like. Looking at cPanel for Lab 2072, there is a feature here called parked domains. And when we look in there, we're going to see that this could be you for your client, this could be you for yourself, or it could be the client if you show them what to do. I have just literally added in this top box that not only is this for lab2072.labclient.com, but if something gets directed by anybody to this server, also direct any traffic for liftmytoes.com to this server, this particular site on the server. Because kind of like the yellow pages, if you go by Spencer Foreman, but you also are running a business like Spencer's web stuff, you want to make sure that the yellow page directory can also direct that name to your phone number. By the way, if you guys have questions, you guys want to type them into the chat box. Jeremy Terrier is helping me out as always. All right, so I'm sure there's going to be some questions, and I'm going to review this stuff because I'm kind of doing the basics here. Now, let's talk about the difference, because the question comes in right away. Won't we use up our reseller accounts? Let's talk about the difference between reseller and regular accounts. And for that, I'm going to go to MDD Hosting. MDD Hosting, you'll notice, has something called shared hosting. And this is true on Bluehost too, by the way. Anybody does this. And they also have something called reseller hosting. So if we go over here, reseller hosting, you'll notice there's a price difference and there's a difference on the performance. What's the real difference between shared hosting and reseller hosting? Take a note. Shared hosting is like buying one seat on a reseller host server. It's like buying one seat on a bus. Whereas when you go to reseller hosting, you are buying a bus, which has usually a limit here. Like the basic, they say you can have 25 people on this bus, 25 sites. That's because they don't want to overload it. If you go to the advanced one, it's 75. So a reseller server is like buying a bus with 75 seats on it, or in the small case, 25 seats. A shared account, which is what you'll get with your HostGator, your basic Bluehost, your even basic MDD, is one seat on someone else's bus. It's run by the host here. MDD runs their own reseller servers where you can buy one space, one seat on that bus for $638 a month or whatnot. When you get this one seat, you will get a cPanel. You will get, like I just showed you here, a cPanel that will kind of look exactly like this. You will not get a WHM like this. This WHM is Web Host Manager, is what you get when you get the bus. So you can have and manage all of the seats. Whereas this is the seat that you get when you buy it directly from the host or when you're managing your own school bus seats. All right, hopefully that's cleared that up a bit. Now, the wildcard domain that I just talked about is you're setting up at the level of your bus. And you're saying, look, I have a domain. In my case, it was labclient.com. You'll pick your own. It could be, Fred Smith's clients or something.com. When you register that at your domain host, like GoDaddy, which is what I hope you would use, you are actually not going to do any DNS stuff here at your domain host. You are instead going to enter the name servers for the bus, because we want all the traffic that comes in here to be directed to the bus. And at the bus, at the web host manager, you'll put a very simple entry in, which I'm not going to do right now because I'm afraid I will delete something accidentally, but it's literally very simple, and there's a little reference to it. You'll add a DNS record, just kind of like you do for an A record normally, that says wildcard or asterisk. Anything at, that's what that means, that wildcard. Anything at my name, like mine's labclient.com. You've come to the right place. And when you do that, anytime you launch a new site in your web host manager, it will automatically and immediately propagate on this domain. I should say, for you guys who are worried, on this subdomain. Now, in my case, I can say anything I want at labclient.com. It could be blah, 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 or ABC, or 123, but I go with this system that I've shown you in the Earn 3K course of a prefix of lab and then a number. And the number is sequential. So all my clients are managed in a simple spreadsheet if I want, and I know sequentially which came before the other. And also, this lab 2072 becomes a future username. So as you can see here, the username of lab 2072 prevents me from having to commit the client to their domain name at first. I can set up the site, it propagates immediately, and at that point, I know there's one WordPress install in one cPanel account on this bus that has maybe 25 to 75 clients on it. But all of them are safe and secure inside of their own little cocoon, their own cPanel account, which is separated on a technological level from all the other accounts, as long as your normal practices are in place. All right, now let's go back to the slides, because now that you've got some basics, hopefully, I want to relate this back to the essence of today's topic, those 5 main points of, hello, how are you in HD, of why having one WordPress install per account is critical. Let's start with security. And again, give me your questions, because I'm going to answer these. This is one of those aha moments. I'm fairly sure most of you are like kind of coming along with me for the ride, not maybe 100% concrete, but by the time we're done, I think you're going to be really, really, really concrete on this. Security. 2 WordPress installs per account are not safe. Now let's talk about why. Okay, it's really basic, but once I show you, I think you're going to see like, holy cow, I can't believe it. All right, let's go back to the bus metaphor, and I'm going to take you over here to the cPanels. Let's say we've created, it doesn't matter if you created, let's say you have a single cPanel account. All right, this was either you bought yourself a $6 account from one of those hosts, or you were smart enough, you got yourself a reseller account to use for your, your demo sites and all of your client stuff. But now you're in one account. The mistake I was telling most of you I want you to avoid from a security standpoint is inside of this one account. And let's make sure I'm in the right panel here. So let's open up a lab 2072. Let's go into that directory. It's easier for me to show this with File Manager, but you could be seeing this, for example, via FTP client. If you make the mistake of putting in additional accounts, additional WordPress installs here, and you don't know why, the first problem is security. Because what happens is almost all of the security plugins, almost all of the security protocols, all of the things that you can do to lock down a site are premised on using a couple basic techniques. The first technique is there's a hidden file that you can see here called htaccess. If it has a dot in front of it, it means it's a hidden file. And htaccess is available not only inside of the public directory, but it can also be located inside of various subfolders, right? So if, for example, I'm inside of, I'm not sure if I have it, but let's see, if I'm in my content folder, there's, yeah, you can see it here. There's an htaccess there. htaccess is a set of rules. I'm not going to show you this one because I don't want to compromise the security of this one, but it's a series of rules, and it's actually utilized by not only the server, of course, but used by the various plugins and the various PHP code that you might run in a WordPress site to instruct the traffic direction, to instruct the server how to handle certain traffic that comes at the site. It's kind of like the rules of the road for your WordPress sites. And if, let's say, you're driving in America, you know the rules of the road are you drive on the right side of the road, the driver's sort of on the left side of the vehicle, and that way they can sort of see the other lane more readily, etc. Wouldn't it be a little crazy if out of the blue you saw people driving on both sides of the road in both directions, or they had two cars in one lane at the same time parallel, or they ignored the stop signs? Well, imagine that situation here. If you go ahead and instead of having one WordPress install in the root of your public HTML, you have multiple folders, you still have the same ultimate starting point, which is the root of the public HTML. And now you have to have all kinds of special, tangled, convoluted rules that handle the direction of traffic. Because instead of making the basic assumption that anybody who comes into the public HTML directory is going to immediately hit the single WordPress site, now we're directing them into little subfolders and into little other things here and there. And as I'll tell you in one of the other examples, that's not only a security problem, it's also a practical problem for things like where to find the content, how to handle the permalinks, and so on. But from a security standpoint, it means that you have to invent all kinds of complicated exceptions to the normal htaccess instructions that would be in place with these really incredible off-the-shelf plugins like iTheme Security or Sakuri, etc. So you're immediately creating a compromise by violating all the normal rules of the road with having one install in the root by setting up multiple subfolders. And I think as I'm saying this, I want to show you something because I'm not sure if you guys get what I'm talking about, but it's so easy and addictive to come into a WordPress site. I'm in Lab 2072, and I go down here to the Softaculous, and I go, WordPress. Oh, I can install more WordPress. And it's just going to let me install anything I want to install here into WordPress, right? It's kind of crazy that way because you can have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10. You can shove as many WordPress installs as you want into this one particular client account. So why wouldn't you, right? Well, we're going to cover that. We're going to go back over that. But as a basic level, because doing so would be just as bad as driving on both sides of the road and doing all kinds of crazy other stuff. Now, question might be coming to your mind, and I'm going to cover this in more detail. What's the difference between doing a subfolder inside of here and a subdomain on a reseller? Well, let's cover this. So I want you to make sure you're crystal clear. If I was having the good fortune to spend 20, 30 bucks a month or so on a reseller account, and I list the accounts, notice that these are all subdomains. Lab 1133, 1137, 1147, 1160. Okay, those all resolve independent of each other because even though there's a dot in there, this is considered to be a full domain name. lab1133.labclient.com will never, ever, ever be confused with lab1137.labclient.com because a subdomain of this nature is considered just like a full regular domain. On the other hand, if I'm silly enough to go into my WordPress single site, Lab 2072, and I create a new WordPress install as a subfolder, now that is not going to be considered a separate domain. Let me show you in the browser window. If I do lab2072.labclient.com, that's considered independent of anything else I do. I can make another one, Lab 2073 or 74 or 75. These are all different. But if I do this, Site 3. Yes, it's true. Those will work. Yes, it's true. I'll get to them if I type blah, blah, point, PHP. But here's the problem, and I'm going to get to this in another step, so I don't want to lose you on this right now. This is all part of the original root domain. That's the nature of the security and the other problems, is that having a subfolder means everything still ends up going back upstream at one point to the same client account. It's not segregated. It's not different. It's not the same as this. Okay. I'm beating you guys over the head with this, I apologize, but I really want this to be sticking with you, because if you understand this stuff, everything else is so simple, right? It's kind of like the first time you drove a car, maybe, right? I mean, you're 16 or 15 and parallel parking, don't get me started. But it's the same here. This isn't complicated. It's one time you set up a wildcard on your reseller account. Takes you 15 seconds to just say new A record, put an asterisk in there, and that means anything at my, my case, labclient.com that comes to the server, it's in the right place. That way, anytime I create a new site, it gets the default of something.labclient. Everybody's happy. So simple, so simple. But it's not a native concept, so I give you that much. All right, let's dive a little bit into the next point. Backup. Doubling the accounts means you're doubling your potential for trouble. And so what this means is that, again, the way that we can back up WordPress sites today is they're really numerous, which is really wonderful. But even starting out at the base level, right inside of a cPanel account, they now, by default, give you automatic backups of, at least in almost all the cases I've seen, they give you automatic backups via Softaculous, which is this script launcher for WordPress. And then there's other plugins and other services. And we've talked about these before. Backup Buddy, WP Backup, Manage WP, etc. All of them, but all of them are going to be confounded if you've made the mistake of having multiple WordPress installs in one directory. And I can't tell you how bad this gets, but I will tell you about a client who's been with me some time, and it went on a bender, basically, and had installed something like 6 or 8 WordPress installations in one setup. And in this case, he was flustered because he couldn't get any backups to work. And I had to look into it. And again, there was a lot of data. There was some videos they were uploading, all kinds of other mistakes. But what had happened was they had taken 8 Chevrolet compact cars and shoved them into the bus of one site. It wasn't even a bus. It was another compact car. They had taken 8 cars filled with tons of stuff, rocks and heavy things, and shoved them into one other small car, which was a single shared hosting account. It wasn't even a reseller account. So when the backup program went to back up stuff, guess what it was backing up? Everything inside of that one little car, including the 8 other sites and all their content and all their videos and blah, 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 blah. So what could have been a backup of one single site, which maybe had virtually no media or anything else, became this, oh my God, I've got a garage full of cars inside of this one account that I'm trying to back up because I have no way to exclude this otherwise without creating, again, an unbelievably complex set of rules. So let's go over here. There's some good questions coming in. I'm going to get to. I see Maria has just asked one about some demos and stuff. And I'm going to give you some ideas what to do with demos, because there is a way around this. Don't fear. I'm not suggesting that if you know what you're doing, you can't use a single site for the demo purpose, but there's a big, big, big difference, okay? It's a small, subtle difference, but it's a big difference in terms of the result. So let's go over here for a second to the cPanel. When we're doing a native installation and not even just a plugin, there are ways, which is really cool. I got to find the spot. I got to go back over to, I think I closed the window. So let me go back over here to, let's say, Lab 2072. I'll go back into the root of the cPanel. When you set up the sites, almost all of your hosts today, and this is MDD have something like an automatic software launcher. In this case, Softaculous is a service. There's other services, and what they do is they aggregate a whole bunch of top scripts, right? But what's really super cool is that when you're launching a new site and you're using a web host manager and a cPanel, you'll be able to actually select today with Softaculous automatic backup. And I've really taken advantage of this because it's just one more layer for free of a backup of everything of that WordPress installation. And it could be in addition to what you're using with Backup Buddy or Managed WP, etc. So that's one of the other reasons too, where, you know what, if you want to make your life easier, having that backup there can really, you know, save your bacon. About a month ago when I was doing some updates at 1WDTV, I, in a tired stupor, just deleted the whole public HTML folder. And thankfully I had triple redundant backups. So this is just, I wanted to show you inside the cPanel for the reasons of that's another, you know, excuse as to why it's really better to stick with one part. All right, let's jump over. I apologize because I have to kind of do this jumping back and forth stuff, but let's jump back over to our slides. Talk about reason number 3, permalinks. I kind of alluded to this, but I want to really bang you on the head about the difference. yoursite.com/site1 is not the same as site1.yoursite.com. And again, to kind of show this, I was in the URL window, but we'll bounce back. So let's go to a blank page here. So if I was to say using subdomains with a reseller account or not, I mean, again, I'm going to give you sort of a safety valve at the end here. I can still do subdomains with a single account. I'm going to show you that. But your site dot, the other way around. Let's do site1. So if I had a subdomain like site1.yoursite.com is not the same as yoursite.com/site1. Not the same at all. This is a subfolder. The other was a subdomain. If you have something here and you put in WordPress, you know, blah, blah, PHP, when things go bad or when some of the plugins or really the services are looking to go back up to the root, they're going to come to your little subdirectory name and they can just keep going. Okay, so if you had a site 2 and, you know, a site 3, you can see the problems here because a lot of things like if you have relative links or if you're having some dynamically generated links, sometimes they will avoid all the stuff in the middle and go right back up to the root. But the problem is that root might not actually need or have anything in it. Like, for example, I showed you labclient.com has nothing in it. If I had something set up with subfolders and the permalinks went bad and they ended up at labclient.com, I'd really be in a pickle, wouldn't I? Because I never intended to use labclient.com. It's just a placeholder. It's holding the actual WHM school bus. But if I had set everything as subfolders and something went bad, people would end up at this page and they would be confused. It wouldn't be the result I intended. Whereas if I have something like lab2072.labclient, blah, blah, point PHP, if something goes bad, they end up back at the root of lab 2072. I think you guys hopefully have by now, because that one is probably the most obvious of all of these. And again, don't let me forget, but I'm going to show you at the end here how we can use subdomains inside of a single cPanel account, like Maria's actually hinting at, for a very limited purpose. We have demos and such. So let me do this. Let's go through reason 4, upselling. Now, everything that I teach at 1WDTV, and I'm sometimes a harsh teacher, I admit to you. I mean, there are times when it seems like I'm beating you up a little bit. The reason is that I consistently tell you that all the reasons you're doing this, the reason you're learning this, the reason you're spending your Friday morning with me is because you know that I have a way for you to get to the money quicker. Most of you have the problem that you're really talented in some way or another. but you're finding that you're struggling with how to focus that talent into a monetization outcome, into how can I make my livelihood from being in the freelance web design business. And the best thing about what I teach at 1WDTV, and really in my own business career as a freelancer, is how to shortcut your way to the payday. And the payday are things that are really, really simple when you look at them with some reflection, but that most people miss. It's no different than, for example, I'm sure the first person to ever invent a wheel had this aha moment, and all of his or her friends were, wow, some caveman probably, cave woman. So, oh my gosh, we've been dragging things along the ground all this time, and this heavy rock thing that is circular, even though they didn't have that word, is rolling. It's so easy. Well, you've basically been dragging big bricks and boulders on the ground, and I'm telling you that for everything you're doing the wrong way or the hard way, there is a wheel, and it already exists. And rather than trying to bang your head against the wall looking for excuses or reasons to make money doing it the way everybody else does, I'm showing you and constantly show you, that's what the whole point is of that $7 deal right below this video, how to get to your first 300 bucks and go, holy cow, I can't even believe it. So let's talk specifically about upselling. If you put all of your clients on a single $6.50 site, one bus, it's not even a bus, it's putting them in a single car, you can't sell them accessories that they need and want for their own. You've handicapped your clients from being able to do that. And this really relates hand in hand with the whole security thing that I was just showing you. So let's bounce back to that window again. One of these days, Google will get I'd love to have a menu bar in Hangouts that I can just go, to various screens, but I, for some reason, have to keep going back and forth. Maybe I can leave this open, but I don't think so. I think it actually keeps closing on me. Let's try it. No, see, it keeps closing. That's too bad. So let's go back over to the cPanel. If you put multiple clients inside of one cPanel with subfolders, remember how I told you you can't do the backup easily? You can't have the security easy? Well, you can't upsell them stuff easily either. Let's say one of the number one upsells that we have is installing MailChimp and being able to, let's say, automatically have MailChimp do certain things. Well, there's plugins that will work directly between your WordPress install and MailChimp. Things like the MailChimp native plugin. There's also one we call, I've heard it's called, I think it's called MailChimp Sync, actually. That's one we have in our software bundle. But whichever the case may be, it can often be the case that when you don't have a standard setup, when your htaccess files are all manipulated, your ability to protect the site is affected, that those plugins no longer give you that opportunity. Furthermore, you lose some of the opportunity to natively connect some of the other services into a directory. Now, I'm not saying you're going to do this, but remember I told you about Softaculous, right? Look at all the options that are available. And these aren't WordPress only, of course. Most of them have nothing to do with WordPress. But for example, like I was saying, WHMCS, there's additional calendars and ad management and blah, blah, blah. There's sometimes things that you can run to accessorize a client's site and charge them for setting up that for you are as simple as just going into here, into their Softaculous, and clicking a button, setting it up. And when you do that, you can charge them for that. But if you've got multiple people inside of one inside of one cPanel account, you've complicated matters. I'm not saying it can't be done, but you've made it so complicated that you're not likely going to be able to pull it off. And then you still go back to the same problems of security and backup. Again, it's like, here's the thing, I always use this reference, the Russian dolls. You ever seen a Russian doll? This is what they look like. And I love these things. They're always fun. They're a little doll within a doll within a doll within a doll. And I think this kind of represents this problem. Come on, Best Spanky. So what happens is you get the little doll is inside the big doll, inside the bigger doll, inside. So you get one big doll, but inside are all these little ones. This kind of really represents what's happening when you do a subfolder directory of WordPress sites versus one of them. Is that, yes, you could have one inside of another, or maybe just a bunch of little ones inside of a big one, but that's just changing the nature of what you should have, what will work, what will give you options, including the ability to sell more stuff. It's just one more hamstrung problem, or one more thing hamstringing you. Hamstringing, I think that's the way to say it. Okay. Let me bounce right back to the slides and let's do number 5. So number 5 is sanity. All right. I use this thing. I said, what's a good way to say this? I like the Russian dolls too, but it's hard to kick out a roommate once they've moved all their stuff into your apartment. So you remember I started with the story of the client that he's with me to this day, and we finally did get him sorted. But we sorted him by removing his sites from WordPress subfolders and putting them out into their own single accounts. And when you're talking about this metaphor, if it's hard to kick out a roommate, imagine you, let's say, rented or had a nice house, and some friends from out of town said, hey, I'd like to come visit and I might stick around for a while. And they come in, and at first they have a suitcase, and things are fine. They're in one little corner of a room. And then you're like, well, why don't you use the guest room for a while? And they're like, sure. And then they go buy some clothes, and winter comes, and next thing you know, they've got not only a drawer, but they've got a dresser full of stuff, and they got a dog, and now they got a car that's in your driveway, and now they're buying food to put in your refrigerator. And next thing you know, they invite their friend from out of town who's visiting to stay at your house. And now you've got a house full of multiple guests with multiple extensions and all kinds of baggage that you never anticipated. Well, that's kind of what happens here when you're talking about, let's say, doing subfolders inside of one single cPanel account. You end up with this problem of like, yeah, at first it's fine, it's simple to manage. And then by the end of the day, you're spending 90% of your energy trying to figure out like, oh my God, I really want my room back. I want this person out, because it's impossible to manage all of the variables when you've got that kind of craziness of not having your own space. All right, now I promised you I would give you some fallbacks, and I'm going to do the Q&A too. But so now that I've given you the 5 why you shouldn't ever do this stuff, and why you're a bad person. No, I'm just kidding. Why you're making a mistake by trying to use a single car like a bus, or shoving multiple cars into one car and pretending it's a bus. Let me tell you some instances where it's okay, as long as you're careful to do it. When I started doing Lab Secrets and then Lab Zip, I was wanting to do some demos for clients. Now, these demos were really basic. They were just clones of existing sites that I already built, and I knew they would be fixed. They were literally static sites, even though they're built on WordPress. They were not being used by someone else. They were not having the content changed. I locked them down so nobody could come in and literally use them, like adding comments. Nobody could add new content. Nobody could join. They were literally like a snapshot in time. And in fact, it's not for this webinar, but I will show you in another webinar how I actually built it so that those things would auto start over. I don't know if the word, they would auto refresh. So what would happen is, if let's say somebody did have a limited use of them, like maybe I gave out a user password or something to just get in the backside to see it, to make sure nobody did graffiti or whatever, I would have it where it would auto reset every hour or 3 hours or something. Even then, that's one type of an exception where I can say to you, with all the 5 rules I've just mentioned, you will keep your sanity and you'll keep your reasonable security and your permalinks and all the other stuff, because that's not a real functional site. It's just kind of like a static billboard, which happens to use WordPress. Now, what are you going to do if that's the case? Well, I'm going to give you a safety net, so get out your pencil. This is how you're going to do it, even if you don't have a reseller account. Okay, so let's go back over to the functioning. There's a couple prerequisites here, okay? And that's the important part. Let's go to the cPanel. Now, we have to remind ourselves about resolution of domains. This is, again, not a reseller setup, but this is a case where, let's say we want to set up a case where we're going to do a demo site, or 2 demo sites, maybe 3, on one simple single account. The first thing we have to consider is, how is it that we're going to get those subdomains to redirect or direct to the proper location? So remember, if we have a single site, and let's say it's labclient.com, it's on the cPanel. If we have set up our domain name host, like GoDaddy, with a wildcard, everything will be fine, right? Because in GoDaddy, they have DNS records. If I have a single site with them and the domain of lab client, I can simply say, let's just go ahead and add a wildcard in order to make that work. And it's really simple. It's just a matter of going into your domain manager, and you go under the A record. And just like I showed you in this example, you'll do the same thing. You will add the wildcard. You'll add an asterisk, and then you'll put in the domain. And you know what I can do is, let me actually show you. I got to go off the screen to log in. Let me just show you. And the reason you need to do this is because if you have labclient.com or whatever your name is, and then you want to have, let's say, subdomains of that, you have to tell the DNS registry system around the world, hey, this subdomain name has to go to this server too, not just the main domain. All right, so let me log in real quick to my GoDaddy account, and I'll show you how this works. And I'll pick one that I can use. Here's one that I'm not using for anything. So let me switch back to the screen. Okay, so what I've done is, and you might be using another service, although I do encourage you for domain name services to use GoDaddy. So I've gone into my main account at GoDaddy, and I'm in the domain manager, and I picked out one of my domains called frieden.com. It's a legacy from a long time ago, and I'm not using it for anything. If I go into my DNS zone file, here's where I have the main record. Now the main record, I don't even know if this is going to anything, but this is actually going to my reseller server, I recognize. I have one record under a host, and that's the ampersand. Ampersand is a global symbol for the domain name. So in other words, instead of having to type out frieden.com every time I do something in the A records, I can just use ampersand. Okay, it's a shortcut. You could still type frieden.com, 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 but everybody just uses ampersand. Now there's another one that we can use, which is the wildcard. So let's say I want to set up my single cPanel account, my little baby doodad here. I want to set that up to have, let's say, a couple demo sites and do it safely and logically. I go to my domain name host, go into the record, the domain manager, and I go under the A host area. And this might look different for obviously another hosting company. And I'm going to add a record. And here, I want to do an A record. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put in the host is, again, ampersand, points to, and then I've got that, what I should do here is let's start over. Let's just copy this. I want to take the IP address, okay, because I'm assuming it's, it's going to be the same IP address and everything else. And let's start over. So I'll make an A record, points to that IP, TTL is a half an hour, and actually here, I started off putting in the domain. It shouldn't be the ampersand. It should be, let's say I was going to make a subdomain like site1.frieden.com. Okay. Now what I've got here is I'm going to be telling the Yellow Pages directory over at GoDaddy that's connected to all other Yellow Page directories around the world, so to speak, that guess what? Frieden.com actually has a particular site called Site1, and it points to this server. And if you ever get any kind of people looking for Site1 specifically, send them over to me. Now, this will work, but you know what? It has a disadvantage to it. The disadvantage it has is that every single time I want to create a new subdomain, I have to make a new A record that Site1, Site2, Site3, Site4. So instead, I want to do the wildcard. The wildcard is that asterisk. And when I do the asterisk, that is saying to the world, hey, anything .frieden.com should be pointed to that cPanel. Okay, do you have that point? Wildcard is an asterisk. When you set it up at your original domain name host, if they're holding the domain name records, if they have the Yellow Pages, which they probably will since you're just on, in this example, a single shared server account, you're going to put in the wildcard here to point to anything dot your domain goes to the same location. Okay, so we finish, and then we'd have to save it. And so this is what it's going to look like when you're done. You now have the main fried-in domain, the asterisk, and then actually I'm saying it the wrong way, the ampersand, and then we've got the wildcard, which is the asterisk. The asterisk, I wonder if I'm saying that right too. Asterisk, I don't know, asterisk. That is the wildcard, which says anything dot fried-in will also go here. Now, remember when I told you earlier in this webinar that if you send the traffic to a site, whether it be a reseller account or whether it be a single host, you have to tell the server, hey, I'm taking up space here, right? I, literally speaking, am inside of your building. I'm in your office space. So if any calls come for me, I'm in this office, number 2. So what we would have to do is go to our server where we have our cPanel. And this is, again, assuming you just have the single cPanel that you got for your $6.50 account. And we need to park any of our new subdomains, okay? And in order to do that, we don't just park the domains, although that would work. We want to create a subdomain. And the reason that we need to create a subdomain is because, yes, you guessed it, we're actually going to need some separate segregated space inside of this server. Rather than just jamming it inside of the directory, we want to actually create a separate segregated space, even though it's on the same server. Now, those technical people here will say, but Spence, it's still going to be a folder in there. Of course it is. And it'll still have lots of other issues. But what's different is that the DNS resolution will no longer consider this the same way as the root domain, because it will be site1.frieden.com. It will not be frieden.com site1. So as I was just mentioning earlier, if something goes bad, site1.frieden.com, blah, 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 it's not going to go back to frieden.com. It's going to fall back to site1. That's the main difference here. So getting back to my cPanel, if I can find the tab. So many tabs, so little time. Okay, so we're going to use subdomain. I would click subdomains, and I would now add, you guessed it, site1. Now, unfortunately, I'm in Lab 2072. Let me actually see if I have fried in here. I think I might. I don't have it, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to keep using Lab 2072. But if I was in the cPanel, let's pretend this was fried in, of course, for continuity. I click on subdomains, and I would add, again, pretend this says frieden.com. I would add site1. Okay. Now, you'll notice that that's creating something that is still going to be a folder, yes, inside the public HTML. But, as I just said, I'm going to say it a third time, but it's not going to resolve the same way. The resolution of the actual domain is not going to be in conflict with the regular lab 2072.lab client, because it's going to be prefixed with site1. And that's the huge difference, okay? In fact, I'm not going to do this because I don't want to mess this up, but when I click create, it's going to show my subdomain here. And then when I want to, and I want to go create, let's say, a new WordPress site, and I go to Softaculous, it will show me inside of the Softaculous installer that I have 2 places now where I can install WordPress, the root domain and the subdomain. Okay, so let me take a look at you guys, see if you're still breathing over there. I know that was some heavy duty stuff, but if you do it that way, you're in a way still messing up a few of your other issues. Like, it's still going to be much harder to do an entire backup of your whole site. It's still potentially a security risk, because if one of those sites gets hacked, they're still in the same space, the same server space, and there's not, a shell around each of them with htaccess or otherwise, but it probably is not going to make you insane because you now at least can address them like literally 2 separate installs in one site. I will tell you though that you're going to be utilizing the single set of resources that the server has allocated to you for 2 or 3 or 4 sites. So if you're intending to do it for a client, no, don't do it, because the other rules are going to be violated as well. With a client, if you put them in as a subdomain, even with the caveat I just gave you, you'll never be able to get them out. They'll be locked in there, and then when you have to change them out, it'll be a lot of effort. It's not impossible, but it'll be a lot of effort to remove them. Furthermore, if that client starts doing crazy stuff and you have a second or a third client, it's literally like teenagers inside the bus. They're going to be killing each other because this one's going to be doing stuff to use up all the server resources while the other 2 are suffering, and so on and so forth. All right, so what I want to do is let me finish up the basic slides that I've got, and then I want to do some Q&A. Hopefully you guys have brought this together in your minds. I'm going to say this one last time, just so we've got it covered. We have 2 types of accounts: reseller accounts, and we have single site accounts. A reseller account is like a school bus. It can have 25, 50, 75 seats, each of them segregated with a little glass bubble around them. A regular hosting account is actually one of those seats, but when you buy it independently, you're buying it from a hosting company directly. Instead of running the bus yourself, you're buying a seat on one of their buses. Now, when you set up a reseller, you can have a primary client name, like I use lab client, and you will point your domain records to the actual server that you're hosting your reseller account on, and that server will get what's called a wildcard, which is that asterisk. And just like I showed you a second ago with GoDaddy, you will go into the zone records for your particular host, and you'll say, I want a new A record here. And it's an asterisk, which means that anything that the web sends to that domain, even if it's prefaced with some, lab 1, 2, 3, 4, you're in the right spot. And that'll also allow you the ability to have that server generate new clients at any time you want without having to wait for propagation. So that, normally it could take hours or days for a new domain to get around the globe and be listed in all those yellow pages directories. Now it takes no time because the main domain is already pointed to that server, and the server usually works immediately to register its own records, so you're good to go. Now, if in fact you do have a single client account, shared reseller server somewhere, maybe with MDD or otherwise, you can still do certain things like I was just discussing, like maybe some static demos or a limited number of things for yourself, but you must do it by way of subdomains on your single client account and not by simply adding subfolders. And when you do a subdomain, the process is very similar as with the reseller, but now you're treating that one little car like you would normally the school bus. And you go to your domain name host, like I just showed you with GoDaddy, and you add a wildcard A record that says anything at Frieden.com, for example, gets going over to my single cPanel account. And then at that cPanel account, you go ahead and enter a new site 2 or site 5. And make sure when you're done that it works, and it typically will. And then you can treat that site 1 or site 2, any of those subdomains, as a regular install. Even though technically it's got a subfolder and it's got some other potential liabilities, at least if you're controlling it yourself, you can do a clean WordPress install, and all of the tools and the software will treat it like it is, which is it's a root level install, because that's how it will resolve. It will resolve to site1.frieden.com, not frieden.com/site1. Okay. All the other caveats apply though. I want you guys to know before I do Q&A If you like the training today, this is kind of an interesting experiment we're doing this month. We had a really, really great outcome with our special offer during Cyber Monday for the 3-day bootcamp course that normally runs $97 in download version. It's $47 if you get it with all of our other training at 1WDTV. But we're offering it here at the webinar for $7 as well. There's a video link, a big green button below the video you're watching this on that'll allow you to get it. And it's really great because if you like this training, that's the essence of everything we do here. In other words, everything I teach you technically and mechanically comes from the training that's in the 3-day bootcamp, because this is where I teach you how to change your focus and think like an entrepreneur who is getting to the money in the shortest way possible. And the money, ironically, is based on WordPress and using WordPress. And even though you may just have learned about WordPress and you've not used it throughout your career, you're going to be shocked because it's literally like the greatest Lego block system in the world. It's in use by literally almost 80% of the sites on the internet. It has got, almost 80 million sites. That's a third of the sites on the internet. It's got open source. It has over 30,000 free plugins and unbelievable numbers of people familiar. But best of all is because it's modular and we train you with all of our free videos as well as our content inside the site, you have the ability, just like with Legos, to start out with the basics, like a little kid putting together a 4-piece Lego car, and work your way up till you're potentially the person, we're coming up to the holidays at the mall, building the 8-foot snowman out of 2 million Lego blocks. The sky's the limit, but your clients are going to love you because by using WordPress, you're giving them the peace of mind that you are not entrapping them into a gilded cage of your making. They know that anybody can work on this site, but they want you to work on it because you've built a relationship, which is, again, the key to what I teach you. People don't care about what tools you are using, but knowing that the tools you use are open source and will allow them flexibility lets them rest easy that they can trust you. Think about it. I mean, if you had somebody that was going to do stuff for you, like, I don't know, something to do with an automobile, if they were going to service your car, wouldn't you feel better knowing that somebody, for example, had already been working with that mechanic? There was 25,000 people working with that mechanic. Or wouldn't you feel better knowing that they have a storefront instead of being hidden away in some kind of offshore cave somewhere? Everything about WordPress is transparent. The user interface is amazing, etc. And so I've taught over 7,500 people in the last 18 months how to use WordPress to solve their livelihood problems, how to become a freelance web designer that can actually live and live very well, quite frankly. And I live it myself. I'm 48 with 3 kids. You know the rest. You guys have been with me, I'm pretty sure. But if you're not, this is a $7 experiment on the promise of you making $300 in the next 3 days. It's literally a no-brainer, and it comes with my own personal satisfaction guarantee. You can return it at any time in the 30 days, but I'll be quite frank with you. I've had 7,500 plus people through our system, and the number of returns I've had, I can count probably on one, maybe onto my second hand. It's an unbelievable deal because it really works. And it's something that the rest of the people here today will probably attest to. Just ask them in the chat room because they're all likely students or have been students at 1WTV. So let's do some Q&A. Jeremy's been helping me out here a little bit. I'm going to center this up here. So some of these questions may have resolved themselves. That's awesome. But if not, this is a great chance for you to fill in any blanks. And I'm going to also open up the chat window here so I can see what's going on. If my camera's going in and out of focus, one of the things I want to tell you guys, I love the new camera. I have not set it up yet. It's a new Logitech 920C, and it has, the ability to do this and that. And I know there's ways to lock it down. I have not touched the software yet. So I will get it set up, but you're not going to see me in the studio much longer. Definitely before the end of, this is my office. You're going to see me in my studio before the end of the year. So let's go and do those Q&As. So there was a couple that I may have covered. I'm going to just go to the top of it, though. Question comes in, won't we use up our reseller accounts? I think they only get 20 to 25. Well, as I showed you before, it is true that most reseller accounts, in particular, jam more people on the bus than there are comfortable seats, right? And I'm talking about those coach buses, the ones that have the captain's chairs. You don't want to have 25 seats and then there's 50 people jammed in the bus, because it's going to really be an unpleasant experience for everyone. Only if cable companies knew this lesson. So yes, you have to allocate your resources. But then again, look at the cost of this. Even with a premium company like MD, I know you guys don't see the screen, it's me. For their reseller accounts without any other discount, a basic is 25 seats for $34 a month if you buy it month to month, or $29 a month if you buy it. So roughly 30 bucks a month for 25 seats. That's a premium because it's $1 and change. Bluehost is less. Bluehost is like 80 cents. Now, I like MDDs for a lot of reasons, including their unbelievable personal service, but let's call it $1.25. Okay, you're paying $1.25 and you're getting all of the benefits that I just mentioned and none of the headaches. Now, you tell me what your time's worth, but I would venture to say that one of those problems that I mentioned would ruin a day, a week, a month, or a year, depending on how bad the severity was. Can you really justify saving $1 a month for avoiding that problem per person? And if you're using what I teach you at 1WDTV, as far as how to monetize or upsell, actually these become profit centers. That's the whole basis of our Earn 3K course inside of 1WDTV. It's I teach you how to sell these actual sites for no less than $25 a month each, plus support. So in my case, 25 times 25 means generating exponential profits for me. Now, if I'm using it myself, yes, it's saving trouble. But if I'm using it sort of for myself and somewhat for the clients, it pays for itself, no doubt, on the first person even. Mike, the WordPress dude asks, Spence, be sure to cover the difference in setting up one WP install per cPanel. I think I covered that. So again, if you're setting up a single site, as we talked about, you're just literally pointing the domain with the A record, and you're using the park domain option instead of the subdomain. So I'll just show you in case there was any confusion left. But Mike wanted to hear, for example, if I was over here in the cPanel and I was not using multiple sites here, but I just wanted to have one site and I have a domain, I go to GoDaddy and I point that A record like I showed you. I'm not sure if I still have that open, so forgive me. But if you can remember, too many tabs now. If you can remember, I point the A record to this IP address for the site, right? And the IP address for your server will always be on the side here, inside of your cPanel. Then for a single site, I would just use parked domains. And for lift my toes, remember a particular single site. That's the domain name that parks here. And it works both ways, right? So as I showed you, you can reach this both by, let me go to a new tab. You reach this by going to liftmytoes.com, or you can still reach it by lab2072.com, which is great because it always gives you a service address to use. And the client's account is also built in there too, so I know who the client is. Next question, how many individual accounts do you have in one reseller account? Well, again, it depends on which one you have, but it's going to be 25, 50, or 75 in most cases. Generally speaking, there's no real rule there because these are all really VPS accounts at the server's level, but they just are allocating how many you can have based upon how much you pay and how much they allocate to you. So for example, if I have a reseller account for 75, it costs me about 75 bucks a month, but they give me enough stuff, enough horsepower and storage and otherwise to allocate between 75 people. So it's kind of like the difference between a propeller plane versus a small jet versus a jumbo jet. They're all proportionally scaled to give a good user experience, but you can't carry the load of a jumbo jet in a small propeller plane, and a small propeller plane is going to cost you less than obviously running a jumbo jet. Question comes in, does editing zone file records only apply to reseller account? No, you can, if you want, and this is again part of the 3K course, I didn't want to cover it, but you can, if you want, not do any DNS work your host to the reseller host so that the reseller can manage all of the, site 1, site 2, site 3. If you wanted to do that just for one account, you could do that too. You could say to GoDaddy or whomever, I'm not going to point my A record here at GoDaddy. I'm just going to say, forget about it. The name of my actual hosting name server is this, like ns1.labclient.com. And in doing that, you're just passing through the name directory to the ultimate destination, which could be your host server. Now, here's my rule. For me, if I have a single site and I know it's going to be just the client's account name and maybe one domain, it's far easier, far more simple, in my opinion, to just do A records. And I do it at the domain name registrar. And there's lots of arguments against that, I'm sure. But for me, I found that's the case because it allows me to do other stuff. For example, like email services. Since I always tell people not to allow email on your own server for a client, by having the MX records up at the domain name registrar for Google Apps Mail or whatever you're using, I'm already modifying those records, anyway. I can't have it both ways. I can't modify the email records up here and then also modify stuff in the records at the reseller account or at the single site hosting account. I have to have the records here or here. So for single sites where I know it's only going to be one domain, I handle it all at the domain name registrar. For reseller accounts, I pass the name server through and handle it all at the reseller. That's a good question. Question, does the wildcard domain DNS entry require private DNS on your reseller hosting? I'm not sure what you mean by private DNS, but I will say, and I kind of just repeated it, that you can do a wildcard subdomain either at your domain name registrar, if they're holding your records and you're using those records there. Just like I showed you in the last example. I can have, site1.friden and site2.friden, and I can literally individually do it, or I can put in the wildcard and then go back and set up whatever subdomain I want on the server. But the records are still up at the domain name registrar. On the other hand, if I'm doing a reseller server, I just pass everything through and set up all the DNS zone files at the reseller. Question, is it possible to park a domain before the domain is pointed to a reseller? Yes. Here's what you would do. You would literally go to your hosting account, your cPanel, and you would park the domain. You would do just like I showed you a minute ago and go in and go under cPanel, park domains, put the domain in. Then later, once you directed the domain, it would propagate and resolve in natural order, right? It doesn't matter, I guess, is to say chicken or the egg. You can put the domain first and then point it, or you can point it and then do the domain. No, though, if you point it and somebody uses it and it's not parked, it's going to end up with one of those weird warning messages like, you're at my host, but I don't know who you are, so here's a general page, and that might be disturbing. So I would always suggest kind of going the other direction. Make sure you have the domain parked and set up before you really point it. And that's assuming, by the way, you don't need to use the domain. That's the reason I recommend you do subdomains with the client accounts, because then I can set everything up with that system and I add the real domain only after. What's the point of WP multi-sites? That's a good question. There's a software option in WordPress many of you may know about, but it's called multi-site. And it was something that came about really because WordPress.com is based on multi-site. And it allows you to have one WordPress independent site, you could run it on your own servers, that you can spawn an unlimited number of blogs. But there's a caveat here. They're not fully independent standalone sites. They use one database. They share the resources like the WP content folders, the themes and the directories of plugins. All that stuff is shared. And then there's another level of management. And so I was somewhat of an expert at this during the time it was relevant. But once the world changed and things like Managed WP came out, and inexpensive hosting came out, it obviated the need to use multi-site, except for maybe one instance, and that is if you are building a business where you want to have a lot of people that are all circling around one domain name. Let's say you have some kind of club or organization and you want to give everybody their own WordPress blog and everybody to share and do all this stuff between each other. Maybe multi-site still makes sense. But if you use multi-site, you're really putting a noose around your neck because, again, it's all built on sharing one set of resources. And it's nearly impossible to take somebody out of there in a single piece. You have to migrate them, and it's very complex. Okay, Maria had asked about not recommending installing more than one WP in one account. If I wanted to add several theme demos using one account, would it still be a problem? Actually, hopefully I covered that. So I saw your question earlier, as I mentioned, and hopefully I've covered that pretty good. For your limited demo purposes, yes, you can get away with it, but just be careful and don't do it for a client under any circumstance. Question comes in. Currently, I have 2 shared server accounts that I use. One of these accounts has 4 live sites, 10 developer sites, and 15 demo sites. Yikes. What's the cheapest way to reconfigure this so I have demo sites, room for development, 4 live sites, and any additional client web hosting that comes along? Okay. There's no right answer here. Multi-site on anything, which I don't think you say you are. Here's what you have to do. You have to literally get a reseller account or reseller accounts, and you have to export each server conglomerations out. So you literally set up a new client-based subdomain on a reseller, or if you need it, more than one reseller, but you only have 20-something accounts, so it should be fine. Get a 25-seat reseller. Set up as many new accounts as you need with a client type of number, like lab1234.labclient, lab1235.labclient, lab1236. Then, one by one, you're going to export and move. You could use managed WP, actually. Those particular, smushed together accounts into their own space on a reseller. Now, you might have to fix permalinks. You may have to duplicate or copy media directories. You may have to clean your database to get rid of extraneous URLs. But once you're done with it, your end result will be a bus with 20 individual seats. And then you can also fix pointing the domains at the end. So once you've resolved you can listen on a wheel. There we go. What's funny is I did an upgrade. I'm going to test this. I did an upgrade this Thanksgiving, which was awesome. I have a 2009 iMac, which is great, and I added 12 gigabytes of RAM, and I added an SSD hard drive, and it's just like a brand new machine. But I'm using this new camera and some other stuff, so there might be little, blips or freezing. Who knows? Okay, let's do a couple more questions, and then we're good for today. What's the cheap? Can you show us how to set up a new subdomain? I think I covered that. All right, let's specifically talk about this video membership kit for a client who wants their own domain or has their own domain. So I'm going to go to that screen. Our video membership kit is our most popular way to get out the door with a solution that you can earn $1,200, $2,400, $3,600. And we have a demo set up at lab2071.labclient. And you guys have perhaps already purchased it, but if you wanted to, for example, check it out, you can always go to 1WDTV and products. And we've actually got some new stuff coming out, but for example, here's the Premier Edition, give you some details of what's in it. But just to show you, this is the demo site. Now, if I was going to set this up for a client, first of all, the quick launch file that you get will give you everything you see here in the demo. But in order to set this up for the client, you're going to do exactly the steps I talked to you about before. Ideally, you're going to have, number one, a reseller server that has a WHM, a web host manager, and you're going to create a new account, right? This is how I would do it. I can create, and I'm going to use the prefix of whatever I want. In this case, let's say I had a client like lab7777 dot labclient.com. And what this does is it tells my web host manager that I am still basically going to be utilizing that wildcard. So when this is done, the username is going to be lab777. I'm going to have a new account for lab7777's username and their password that will have an subdomain of lab7777.labclient.com. And I'd select the package and so on and so forth. When that's done, the beauty of using a reseller account is that it will automatically create an entry in the manager here, and I'll be automatically able to address the site and immediately install WordPress. Now, a couple of you guys are asking this question. No, because you've seen me do it. I can do this whole process in about 3 minutes. I can create a new site, I can go to the site, I can install WordPress, and I can get to the quick launch file and up and running. It's literally that simple, that fast. But you see, that's the benefit of having a reseller account. I automatically can launch this without having to ever go back to GoDaddy or do any domain name stuff or even going and parking or creating subdomains. It's automatically being done by default. That's the whole point of this. That's why I keep banging on you guys about getting this server. You can judge for yourself, but I don't know about you. I know that I waste way more than 30 or 40 bucks a month on doing silly stuff like getting a cup of coffee at Starbucks or, you know, whatever, paying too much in parking fees when I go to some place. I can't imagine you can justify spending more time than you're saving here for that 25 or 30 bucks. I mean, literally, it would take you 5 to 10 times more in little click, 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 click for each thing you set up by having standalone, you know, shared accounts than to have one reseller server and just launch it like I just did. So that time savings is something I want you to really consider. Last question, maybe one or two. No, one question. Are there any subdomain URL address records in the database so that when you clone the site, do you have to rewrite those URLs to new subdomain URLs? Well, that's a good question, and that's why it's really important to have a consistency. So here's how it works out. If you create a site with subdomains, there will be 1 or 2 instances where you have to adjust it once you've moved it. For example, inside of WordPress, there are demos so that they use relative URLs instead of absolute. So for example, if I was at Lab 2071, right over here, and I was to look at some of these menu items, like maybe the Buy Now button or Buy Membership, these things were not set up by putting in the absolute URL for lab2071.labclient.com/allvideos. They might have been set up by using either the built-in WordPress system or with a relative URL, meaning I would have put in just the, you know, do this or something. By putting in just the relative part, that means clones this account and they have their own main domain. They don't have to rewrite anything. But if you want to be doubly sure, you log into the site, and when you log into the site, you'll go into your actual menu manager, and in the menu manager, you can double check to make sure that everything is the way it should be, right? That you have nothing that fails. And also, when you set up a new site, you should always click on the reset or save the permalinks button under settings permalinks, because that will ensure that even if you have migrated, WordPress will figure out how to resolve those, okay? Hopefully that wasn't too obtuse for you. All right, and I think we've come to the end of it. It's about 11:35. What I want to emphasize at the end here, it's really important to me, is that this is just one aspect of building your WordPress business, but it really, really is the most important part. The 3-day boot camp is critical to thinking like an entrepreneur and understanding that there's a really short path that you can go on in a weekend to get to this world where myself and a lot of the 7,000 plus other people have been living. It doesn't require you to go to PHP or coding school. It doesn't require you to be an expert artist. It doesn't even require you to have any experience using WordPress before. But one of the first parts, the first Lego block, the key piece is this base, the thing we're going to stick everything on. And that's just understanding that there's two types of setups, one that's right and one that's not. And I don't mind being really a little bit militant about this, and I apologize to anybody who's offended by it, but it's because I've done this for so long and I've seen it. I've made the mistakes myself, setting up dozens or hundreds of clients with individual sites where I did it the wrong way and had to spend weeks or more undoing that mistake, in some cases years, because I have a few clients that are still sort of living that dream. I have one client left from my early days of HostGator, and it's a reminder, right? It's a humbling reminder. So hopefully you've gotten a lot of value out of this. This is actually going to be lesson 2 out of our 8 lesson series that are being built from our live events. I hope that if you've not joined me before, you'll come on over, take advantage. Right, Bill? And what's going to happen too is I'm going to do a random drawing in secret in my cave. One of you is going to be announced by Darlene, our social media manager, as being the winner of $97 of bling here at 1WD-TV. So that could be great for either a full software bundle for a year or for membership or something else. But we're going to publish it on our Twitter channel so that you know who it is. Everybody who registered and attended today are eligible. So you might have a nice surprise. If not, I hope you have a great weekend. If you have any questions, you can always reach me at 1WD.TV. Click on the support or the help tab at the top, or Spencer at 1WD.TV is my email. As always, this is Spence, the evil genius, and I'll see you next time.